Dugald Patterson McDougall Semple, February 7, 1884 to January 19, 1964, was a Scottish advocate of simple living and animal rights, naturalist, prolific author, and fruitarian. He is sometimes credited with co-founding the vegan movement in 1944, with Dorothy and Donald Watson and other friends, without using the term vegan. Semple's mother hailed from a farm near Bath, and his father worked as a tailor. He was born in Johnstone near Paisley, Scotland. Dugald won a bursary to Paisley Grammar School and served an apprenticeship as an engineering draftsman. In 1907, he moved into a tent, and later an old omnibus located on Linwood Moss. In 1916, he was a conscientious objector and thus exempted from military service on condition that he continued lecturing on food economy. Dugald Semple, vegan, and Scottish apostle of the simple life, farmed at Davies o' the Mill near Bath in North Ayrshire from the 1930s until around 1950, when it was a small holding. Dugald was a hippie before hippies officially existed and started living in an army tent from 1907. He was sometimes known as the hut man from living in his hut on wheels or caravan and therefore probably did not live in the house. He later lived in Fairley, North Ayrshire. Semple preached self-responsibility and care for others. Curiously, for a vegetarian, he appears in a photograph of Davies o' the Mill to be keeping chickens. He regularly appeared on radio programs, including Out with Romany and Hunt Man of the BBC. He lived with his wife Kathy in London for 2 years when he was the secretary of the Vegetarian Society. A regular visitor to Ailsa Craig, he was known locally as the Birdman and was an enthusiast for outdoor living, publishing a book entitled A Free Man's Philosophy. He welcomed walkers and cyclists who often camped on his land. In 1963, Dugald detailed his dietary journey. I began rather drastically over 50 years ago in 1910 by cutting out not only all meat or flesh foods, but milk, eggs, butter, tea and coffee. Cheese I have never eaten, indeed I hate the very smell of this decayed milk. Next, I adopted a diet of nuts, fruit, cereals, and vegetables. On this ethnic fare I lived for some 10 years, and found that my health and strength were greatly improved. While I was in London, during World War I, one found it necessary to add some dairy products to my meals, but on returning to Scotland one gradually eliminated these again. In later life, he lived in a modern cottage and even owned a car. Dugald Semple died in a nursing home in Fairley, aged 79. The cause of his death was not disclosed. Kathy Amos, his wife, predeceased him, dying of heart failure in 1941. They had no children, although Kathy had a son, Ian, who was killed in World War I. The Fruitarian Society was plagued with disputes over the definition of fruitarianism from as early as 1907. The Scottish Vegetarian Society featured an article in their 1907 journal entitled Fruitarianism by Dugald Semple, in which he wrote, "By fruitarianism is meant a dietary consisting chiefly of nuts and fruits. Cooked cereals and vegetables are not necessarily excluded, although the exclusion of all cooked foods, should means and knowledge permit, will lead to better results. For this dietary it will be noticed that not only is flesh and meat omitted, but also the animal products milk and eggs. The use of these products by vegetarians has long been one of the chief objections to vegetarianism, especially in medical circles." Dugald stated, to make the point about lacto-vegetarianism, stated that he had never tasted cheese, and therefore it could not be considered as an essential binding agent for body and soul. In 1912, Dugald stated that he did not believe that milk and eggs were natural foods for man. Eggs were meant to produce chickens and not omelets, and cow's milk is a perfect food for a calf, but most assuredly not for a grown-up human being. In his 1915 book, Joys of the Simple Life, he wrote an essay entitled Alone with Nature, stating that I left off eating flesh meat and drinking tea 10 years ago, and for over 8 years have rarely used milk, eggs, salt, sugar, dairy butter, white bread, or condiments of any kind. My health has improved considerably and I have never regretted the change." Committee positions. In 1938, Dugald was the president of the Scottish Vegetarian Society, SVS, and vice president of the Vegetarian Society. In 1944, Dugald is recorded as the chairman of the Vegan Society and vice president of the International Vegetarian Union. In 1953, he was honorary president of the Scottish Vegetarian Society. In 1954, Dugald was still president of the SVS, one of several vice presidents of IVU. Lecture tours. The Victoria Advocate newspaper of Texas reported that he lectured on his beliefs and way of life in the USA, Canada, and America. From the August 1910 issue of the Vegetarian Messenger, Mr. Dugald Semple, the Scottish apostle of the simple life, is arranging lecturing tours for the coming winter. He is prepared to give lectures for a modest fee, and we are sure that his services would be appreciated by vegetarian and allied societies. His address is Wheelhouse, Bridge of Weir, Scotland. The address appears to refer to his horse-drawn caravan that can be seen in the photograph of Davies o' the Mill. Conferences. Dugald was a delegate from Great Britain to the 1938 10th World Vegetarian Congress held in Norway, attending as president of the Scottish Vegetarian Society and vice president of the Vegetarian Society. He delivered a speech on vegetarianism and peace, in which he stated vegetarianism is not merely a matter of food reform, it is a philosophy of life, and war will only cease when we cease to live as beasts of prey. So long as we prepare for war, we shall get war. We must not only study Darwin but also Kropotkin. Those animals which are carnivorous are becoming less and the vegetarian animals are increasing. Vegetarianism is the first great step. The killing of human beings is akin to the killing of animals, and so the exploiting of animal life leads to the selfish exploitation of human beings. Dugald quoted Robert Burns, appealing for a more widespread appreciation of the real values in life, more sunshine for the body, more love for the soul, peace for every living creature the world over. In 1953, at the 15th World Vegetarian Congress held in India, Dugald stated, "What a tragedy it would be if Mother India was to become estranged from her sympathy with the rights of animals, which, although it may have been carried to extremes, nevertheless has been a noble example to the flesh-eating and vivisecting nations of the West. Yes, let us do our utmost to save India from the soulless materialism of imperialistic nations. Let us show that war and disease are the result of disobedience to spiritual and natural law. That if we harden our hearts against the everyday cruelty of flesh-eating and blood sports, we cannot wonder that the whole, so-called civilized world is preparing for another world catastrophe. East and West must meet if we are to hasten the coming of the New Jerusalem. We go forth to show that science is an affair of the heart as well as the head. That the pure Indian need not live on such a meager diet, and that we must realize that without love the people perish. The basic error, as Mitra, editor of the Indian Journal, once told me, you people live beside yourself, we live from ourselves. It is only more life and the soul that can unite all people." In 1955, at the World Vegetarian Congress in Paris, Dugald Semple was listed as a speaker. Individuals Morris Kroc, born in Johannesburg, South Africa, and whilst seeking solutions for his health problems was influenced by natural healing writers of the 20th century such as Dugald Semple, Vincent Priesnitz, Louis Kuhn, etc. Government civilian rationing began at the end of World War I, on January 1, 1918, with sugar, then meat, butter, and margarine. The government of the day consulted Dugald and a colleague to educate people concerning how to ration available produce and other food and to propose acceptable substitutes for meat, which had become familiar in their diets. No Stipend League. Dugald organized a Scottish No Stipend League against the Church of Scotland's practice of levying a tithe on landowners for the minister's stipend. He was particularly offended because the levy applied to landowners regardless of their faith. Simple Life Visitors. Paisley, J. and J. Cook, Printers, 1909. Living in Liberty, or The Wheelhouse Philosophy. Paisley, Alexander Gardner, 1911. Fruitarianism, a treatise on the diet question. Paisley, Alexander Gardner, 1913. Joys of the Simple Life. London, G. Bell, 1915. Simple Life Recipes, with hints on diet. London, C. W. Daniel, 1915. Life in the Open. London, G. Bell, 1919. Diet and Good Health, a popular treatise on the food question. London, C. W. Daniel, 1925. Diet in Relation to Climate. London, C. W. Daniel, circa 1928. A Free Man's Philosophy. London, C. W. Daniel, 1933. An Appeal for Freedom. Circa 1935. What to Eat in Wartime, with Meatless Recipes by Cathy Semple. Glasgow, William McClellan, 1943. Be Your Own Doctor, Natural Cures for Common Ailments. Glasgow, William McClellan, circa 1945. Contains details of cures for colds, constipation, how to slim, better eyesight, health from herbs, etc. Looking at nature. Glasgow, William McLellan, circa 1946. A Scots Health Cookery Book, with meatless recipes by Dugald Semple. Glasgow, William McLellan, 1949. Round Kintyre with Dugald Semple. Glasgow, William McLellan, 1950. Home Cures for Common Ailments, with Curative Diet. Glasgow, William McLellan, 1952. The Sun Food Way to Health. London, Health for All Publishing Company, 1956. Joy in Living. Glasgow, McLellan, 1957.